This will be an extensive overview covering various periods, sources of wealth, and notable monarchs. I'll break it down into sections for easier reading and comprehension. Let's begin. Introduction to the wealth of French kings. The wealth of French kings throughout history has been a subject of fascination, envy, and sometimes controversy. From the early Merovingian dynasty to the final Bourbon monarchs, French royalty amassed incredible fortunes through various means. Their wealth was not just a personal asset but also a representation of the kingdom's power and prestige on the European stage. To truly understand the wealth of French kings, we must consider several factors. The changing nature of wealth and power over more than a millennium of French monarchy. The various sources of royal income. The expenditures and lifestyles of different monarchs. The economic and political contexts of different eras. The impact of royal wealth on French society and culture. This comprehensive exploration will take us through the major dynasties that ruled France, examining how each contributed to and shaped the concept of royal wealth. The Merovingian dynasty, 481 to 751. The Merovingian dynasty, founded by Clovis I, marks the beginning of what we consider French monarchy. While their wealth may seem modest compared to later kings, the Merovingians laid the foundation for royal power and wealth accumulation. Sources of wealth. Land ownership. The king owned vast tracts of land, which provided both direct income and political power. Tribute from conquered territories. As the Franks expanded their control, tribute flowed into the royal coffers. Taxes. Though not as sophisticated as later systems, the Merovingians collected various forms of taxes. Plunder from warfare. Successful military campaigns brought wealth in the form of precious metals, jewels, and other valuables. Notable aspects. The concept of the royal treasury began to take shape during this period. Wealth was often measured in land and livestock rather than currency. The distribution of wealth to loyal followers was a crucial aspect of maintaining power. Challenges. The practice of dividing the kingdom among heirs often led to fragmentation of wealth and power. The rise of powerful nobles sometimes challenged royal authority and wealth. The Carolingian dynasty, 751 to 987. The Carolingian dynasty, most famously represented by Charlemagne, saw a significant increase in royal wealth and power. Sources of wealth. Expanded territory. Charlemagne's conquests greatly increased the land under royal control. Improved administration. More efficient tax collection and management of royal estates increased revenues. Church donations. As defenders of the faith, Carolingian kings received significant wealth from the church. Control of trade routes. Oversight of important trade paths brought in customs duties and fostered economic growth. Notable aspects. The concept of the royal fisc developed, representing all properties and rights belonging to the crown. Charlemagne's coronation as Holy Roman Emperor in 800 CE brought additional prestige and wealth. The Carolingian Renaissance led to investments in education, arts, and architecture, showcasing royal wealth. Challenges. Viking invasions in the 9th century disrupted trade and depleted royal treasuries. The practice of granting land to vassals, feudalism, began to erode direct royal control over wealth. The Capetian dynasty, 987-1328. The Capetian dynasty marked a turning point in French royal wealth, as the kings gradually centralized power and expanded their economic base. Sources of wealth. Royal domain. The kings focused on expanding their personal landholdings, increasing direct income. Feudal dues. As overlords, kings collected various payments from their vassals. Taxation. More sophisticated tax systems were developed, including the taille, land tax. Regale. The right to collect revenues from vacant church offices brought significant income. Notable monarchs and their contributions. Philip II Augustus R. 1180-1223 greatly expanded the royal domain and improved administration. Louis IX R. 1226-1270 Despite costly crusades, his prudent financial management and reputation for justice strengthened royal finances. Philip IV R. 1285-1314 introduced new taxes, debased the currency, and famously suppressed the Knights Templar, seizing their wealth. Key developments. The creation of the Chamber of Accounts in 1256 to manage royal finances. The growth of Paris as a royal capital, showcasing the king's wealth through grand building projects. The establishment of a professional bureaucracy to manage the expanding royal administration. Challenges. Costly crusades often strained royal finances. Conflicts with England, particularly the beginning of the 100 Years' War, required significant military expenditures. The Valois dynasty 1328–1589. The Valois period saw great fluctuations in royal wealth, from the hardships of the Hundred Years' War to the opulence of the Renaissance. Early Valois 1328–1422. The Hundred Years' War severely strained royal finances. Kings often resorted to currency debasement and heavy taxation to fund the war effort. The Black Death 1347–1351 caused economic disruption but eventually led to increased wealth concentration. Notable monarchs. Charles V R. 1364–1380, known as the Wise, he rebuilt royal finances and expanded the royal library. Charles VII R. 1422–1461, after near bankruptcy, he reformed the tax system, creating the first permanent royal army. Later Valois 1461–1589. The end of the Hundred Years' War allowed for economic recovery and growth. Renaissance culture influenced royal spending on arts, architecture, and luxury goods. Notable monarchs. Louis XI R. 1461–1483, known as the Universal Spider, he significantly expanded royal power and wealth through cunning diplomacy and economic policies. Francis I R. 1515–1547, a great patron of the arts, he began the transformation of the Louvre into a royal palace and brought many Italian artists to France. Sources of wealth. Increased taxation. The taille became a permanent tax, providing a steady income. Salt monopoly. The Gabelle salt tax became a major source of revenue. Trade. Growing international trade, especially with Italy, brought new wealth. New World exploration. Though lagging behind Spain and Portugal, France began to see income from colonial ventures. Challenges. Expensive wars in Italy drained the treasury. Religious wars in the latter half of the 16th century caused economic instability. The Bourbon dynasty 1589–1792, 1814–1830. The Bourbon era saw the height of absolute monarchy in France, with royal wealth reaching unprecedented levels. Early Bourbons. Henry IV R. 1589–1610 ended the religious wars and rebuilt the economy, famously promising a chicken in every pot. Louis XIII R. 1610–1643, along with Cardinal Richelieu, centralized power and improved financial administration. The age of Louis XIV, 1643–1715. Louis XIV, the Sun King, represents the pinnacle of royal wealth and power in French history. Sources of wealth. Efficient taxation. Jean-Baptiste Colbert reformed the tax system, increasing revenues. Mercantilism. Policies aimed at accumulating bullion and developing French industries. Colonial expansion. France established a significant overseas empire, bringing in new resources. Displays of wealth. The Palace of Versailles. This opulent palace became the ultimate symbol of royal power and wealth. Patronage of the arts. Louis XIV's court became the cultural center of Europe. Military might. France maintained the largest standing army in Europe. Challenges. Constant warfare drained the treasury. Tax exemptions for the nobility and clergy limited potential income. The lavish court lifestyle was enormously expensive. Late Bourbons. Louis XV R. 1715–1774. Despite initial financial reforms, his reign saw growing economic problems. Louis XVI R. 1774–1792 inherited a state deep in debt, leading ultimately to the French Revolution. Sources of wealth. Continued taxation. Though increasingly unpopular, taxes remained the primary source of income. Colonial trade. Caribbean colonies, particularly Saint-Domingue, Haiti, brought immense wealth through sugar and coffee production. Challenges. Involvement in the American Revolutionary War further indebted the state. Failed attempts at financial reform led to the calling of the Estates General in 1789. The French Revolution and Napoleon 1789–1814. The French Revolution marked a radical break with the traditional concept of royal wealth. Key developments. Confiscation of church property in 1789 temporarily boosted state finances. Abolition of feudal dues and creation of a new tax system. The introduction of assignats, a form of paper money, initially based on the value of confiscated lands. Napoleon's Empire, 1804–1814. While not a traditional king, Napoleon amassed significant wealth as emperor. Sources of wealth. Military conquests. Plunder and war indemnities from defeated nations. Efficient tax collection and administration across the empire. Control of continental trade through the continental system. Displays of wealth. Lavish coronation ceremony in 1804. Extensive public works and monuments in Paris and across France. Patronage of arts and sciences. Restoration and July Monarchy, 1814-1848. The return of the Bourbons and subsequent Orleans monarchy saw attempts to balance royal wealth with constitutional limits. Louis XVIII and Charles X, 1814-1830. Restoration of some royal properties. Civil list. A fixed income for the royal household, separate from state finances. Compensation for nobles whose lands were confiscated during the Revolution. Louis Philippe, 1830-1848. Known as the Citizen King, he attempted a more modest royal lifestyle. Continued use of the civil list system. Personal wealth from the Orleans family estates. Analysis of royal wealth through the ages. Evolution of wealth concepts. From land-based wealth in the early Middle Ages to more diverse portfolios including cash, investments, and colonial resources. The gradual separation of personal royal wealth from state finances. The increasing importance of credit and banking in royal finances. Impact on French society. Royal wealth is a driver of artistic and cultural development. The burden of taxation on the common people to support royal expenditures. Royal economic policies shaping France's industrial and commercial development. Comparison with other European monarchies. French royal wealth often rivaled or exceeded that of other European courts. The centralization of French monarchy allowed for greater wealth concentration compared to more fragmented realms like the Holy Roman Empire. Competition with England and Spain drove much of the economic policy, particularly regarding colonial expansion. Sources of royal wealth in detail. Land and agriculture. The royal domain. Personal landholdings of the king, gradually expanded over centuries. Feudal dues. Payments from vassals holding land from the king. Forest rights. Income from timber sales and hunting privileges. Agricultural innovations. Royal support for new farming techniques to increase productivity. Taxation. Evolution from irregular levies to permanent taxes. Key taxes. Taille, land tax, gabelle, salt tax, aids, sales tax, traites, customs duties. Tax farming. The practice of selling the right to collect taxes to private individuals. Struggles with tax exemptions for nobility and clergy. Trade and commerce. Royal monopolies on certain goods, e.g., salt, tobacco. Customs duties on international trade. Chartering and taxing trading companies. Minting of coins and control of currency. Colonial resources. Exploitation of New World resources, particularly in the Caribbean. African slave trade supporting colonial plantations. Fur trade in North America. Spice trade competition in the Indian Ocean. Extraordinary sources. War booty and indemnities from defeated enemies. Forced loans from wealthy subjects. Sale of offices and titles. Confiscation of property, e.g., from religious minorities or political enemies. Royal expenditures and lifestyle. Court life. Evolution of the royal court from traveling medieval households to the fixed splendor of Versailles. Costs of maintaining a large royal household, including servants, guards, and courtiers. Elaborate ceremonies and festivals showcasing royal power. Architecture and art. Construction and maintenance of royal palaces, e.g., Louvre, Versailles, Fontainebleau. Patronage of artists, sculptors, and architects. Accumulation of art collections and precious objects. Development of royal manufactories, e.g., Gobelins tapestries, Sèvres porcelain. Military expenses. Costs of maintaining standing armies and navies. Fortress construction and maintenance. Financing of wars and military campaigns. Diplomacy and foreign policy. Expenses for embassies and diplomatic missions. Gifts to foreign rulers and dignitaries. Subsidies to allies during wartime. Personal luxuries. Fine clothing and jewelry. Exotic foods and wines. Entertainment, including theater, music, and hunting. Mistresses and illegitimate children. Patronage and pensions. Rewards for loyal nobles and officials. Pensions for artists, writers, and scientists. Charitable donations to religious institutions. Management of royal finances. Evolution of financial administration. Early medieval ad hoc management to sophisticated bureaucracies. Creation of the Chamber of Accounts 1256 for financial oversight. Superintendent of Finances position, 16th-17th centuries. Attempts at reform, including Necker's public disclosure of state finances in 1781. Key financial ministers and their policies. Sully under Henry IV. Restructuring debts and promoting agriculture. Colbert under Louis XIV. Mercantilist policies and tax reform. John Law under Louis XV. Experimental banking and paper money schemes. Turgot and Necker under Louis XVI. Attempted reforms and transparency. Banking and credit. Royal reliance on financiers and tax farmers for loans. Experiments with state banks, e.g., Laws Bank Royale. International credit networks, particularly with Dutch and Swiss bankers. Accounting and budgeting practices. Development of more sophisticated bookkeeping methods. Struggles with separating state finances from personal royal expenses. Periodic attempts at creating comprehensive budgets, often revealing systemic deficits. Royal wealth in times of crisis. Wars and military conflicts. 100 Years' War. Debasement of currency and new taxes to fund the war effort. Wars of religion. Economic disruption and depletion of royal treasuries. Louis XIV's wars. Massive military expenditures leading to long-term debt. 7 Years' War and American Revolution. Financial strains contributing to the crisis of the Ancien regime. Economic crises. The Great Famine of 1315-1317, impacting agricultural revenues. The Black Death. Initial economic collapse followed by increased wealth concentration. John Law's Mississippi. Bubble 1720, attempt at financial innovation leading to economic crisis. Fiscal crisis of the 1780s. Failure to reform finances leading to the French Revolution. Natural disasters. Impact of crop failures on tax revenues. Expenses for disaster relief and reconstruction. Political upheavals. Nobility revolts, e.g., the Fronde challenges to royal financial control. Popular uprisings over taxation, limiting the crown's ability to raise funds. The French Revolution. Radical transformation of the concept of royal wealth. Royal wealth and economic policy. Mercantilism. Colbert's policies under Louis XIV, promoting French industries and exports. Establishment of royal manufactories to produce luxury goods. Navigation acts to challenge English and Dutch maritime dominance. Agricultural policies. Royal support for agricultural improvements, e.g., introduction of new crops. Attempts to modernize farming techniques. Conflicts over enclosure and forest rights. Industrial development. Royal charters and privileges for new industries. Investment in infrastructure, e.g., roads, canals. Regulation of guilds and labor. Monetary policy. Control over coinage and currency values. Periodic debasements to increase royal income. Experiments with paper money and banking. International trade. Chartering of trading companies, e.g., French East India Company. Negotiation of trade treaties. Use of tariffs to protect French industries. The cultural impact of royal wealth. Architecture and